Yeah. Okay, so typically this confidential computing talk or sort of area is going to be sitting almost firmly always inside of a security track. I thought it was really, really important to get this information out to the government regulation because it's increasingly important. So today, I'm going to explain why I am talking to you about confidential computing, exactly what it is, what conditions that it's appropriate for, and why more data may need to be confidentially computed than ever before, and that is because of the concept, well, quantitative concept of unicity. But before we start, I usually have to be in the middle of about 10 security talks, all of which will be doing their best to convince you that their personal problem is the biggest problem that there has ever been in the existence of the human race, which is excellent. But if you sit through 16 of those talks, you are going to raise your blood pressure and you're going to become a worse decision maker and you're going to not be able to remember the information as well. So I'm going to use a 1-minute poem that I always listen to myself before I give a talk. It puts me in a relaxed state. I strongly encourage you to close your eyes. It'll put you in a brief beta state, which means you'll be able to remember the information more. So please enjoy my favorite poem about open source that's not about open source.
Nothing is what I need. Everything is already here for me. The most important things in life are mutual and free. I believe that in my final hour, all the discounts and judgments won't matter, and I'll be left with the investment that I made on my life and the people along with me for the ride. It's easy to buy things. It's easy to say things. It's easy to wish for things, but it's hard to abide by the hard work I know it takes me to recognize that I am already good inside. So for humanity's sake, whatever you do it a lot. Never stop. Believe in yourself no matter what. And when you're at the top, enjoy the view. Dear every single person ever, I think I love you.
So now we've all had a little bit of a deep breath. We're not going to listen to it twice unless you really want to. Now you're going to be in a much better cognitive situation to remember possibly the information that I give you today at this talk than any other one because you were not cognitively primed for it. I am here today because I have this background. So I started out my career in 2011 working with Boeing as an undergraduate intern in my very first year. Why? Because I went up to the front of a speaker, went up to talk to a speaker who was explaining to us this sort of HCI research, and I looked at their transcripts. I myself am a pilot, and it said, "These are wrong, can I fix these for you?" And so by the age of 18, I was in my first peer-reviewed paper for the human-computer interaction for cockpits in failure conditions, specifically studying where information is stored either in the cockpit or in the conversations between the pilot and the co-pilot, also known as your set of maintainers in an open source project. Then, from that, I received a full scholarship from the National Institutes of Health, allowing me to do self-directed research from the age of 19, as long as it was biomedical, so I had to leave Boeing. And this is what I studied. My first set of studies were on psychological resilience across a lifetime. So I think a lot about the ways to show up in spaces when you are dealing with complex environments. How do you stay resilient when you are trying to work on allowing every metaphor for a falling airplane to not fall out of the sky? Then I started working on real-time algorithms for clinical interventions. This then moved me out of medicine into a request from the government, looking at aggregate surveillance algorithms, which led to MLOps for scalable Kubernetes. Then I jumped the pond and I left the security clearance space, and I've been working on site reliability engineering, open source supply chain, and I've just switched into confidential computing. I am always trying to work on the most interesting and difficult problem that I can find. This is the set of funding which allowed me to do that. Now, I want to take one brief moment to come back to this, just so that we can lean into a bit of what I think is an issue. If you are going to be cleared for security clearance, you cannot hold any debt whatsoever. So without these funding pathways, the entrance into security clearance, at least for the US federal situation, is becoming less representative of the normal demographics. I just went back home and gave a talk at the Intertribal Resource Center. I myself am a dual citizen of both the United States and of the Cherokee Nation, which is BIA recognized. If you want only federally recognized nations, there are over 376 of them, 74. It would take you a year and a half if you wanted to spend every day to reach out to every single, not just culture. And this is why I wanted to make this very clear to this international audience. If you have someone representing tribal nations, do not put them in the DE&I track. That is not appropriate. They are in the government and policy track. They have governments. My last note on this is that becoming a tribal coordinator for 3 years was probably the best training that I ever received to communicate at large with open source, because you have to understand different cultures, different languages, and you have to be incredibly respectful to all of them while trying to coordinate resources. So, on to the core of the talk. What is classical computing versus confidential computing? Classical computing has 3 different aspects to it. So data can exist in these 3 states: moving between things, in transit, at rest, data in storage, and in use, which is when the data is being processed by an algorithm. So for data in use, data in transit and data at rest, cryptography is really the trick for this. And there is a non-exhaustive list of the types of cryptography that we use in order to securely move things across network, including, increasingly, quantum-resistant solutions, which there was an excellent talk on in the cybersecurity track just a few hours ago. But the third state, protecting data in use, this has not been well addressed. It used to be that if you, here, let's explain it this way. So data in use, that refers to the workload that is actively being processed or accessed by a computer. It's often an input function for algorithmic or real-time analysis. In order to deal with that, without having to decrypt the data in order to compute it, confidential computing is designed to protect sensitive data in use via trusted execution environments. And we really have to understand where this field came from. The first ideas around creating confidential compute architecture started in 1978 from this excellent write-up where they understood that the best cryptography available at the time was relatively useless if you have to de-encrypt it to compute. So, a couple of the ways that we do security in these situations, there is type 1, 2, and 3. These are currently labeled by what is the most secure. So let's start from the bottom just to understand this. Type 1 isolation is the physical separation of distinct hardware components. Often occurs in these settings. Type 2, I will fix this a little bit, but there's achieved through a form of virtualization. It's a little bit of a wrong definition, but the thing that I want you to focus on here is the type 3 isolation. You want hardware-based isolation in a TEE. Some clear solutions and their limitations to this: hardware security modules, expensive, hard to scale; field programmable gate arrays, hard to program, bad for generalized compute; but trusted execution environments are isolation that is specifically aimed at the CPU, GPU for these compute conditions. So what exactly is a TEE? A TEE is a secure area within a processor, ensuring that both the code and the data are loaded and are isolated from other software running on the service, specifically isolated from the operating system. This is important. The isolation is critical to safeguarding data and operations, even if other parts of the system are compromised, again, like the operating system. And a shorthand to remember this is that it's fully secure functionality with chip-based security. But a better definition of this to really understand what we mean when we talk about confidential computing is this specific definition. So confidential computing is the protection of data in use while, by performing computation in a hardware-based and attested TEE. When I mean hardware-based, I say that indicates that the protection mechanism is rooted in the hardware itself, leveraging those dedicated features. An attestation. The attestation in this context refers to the process of cryptographic verification of the integrity and the authenticity of compute. So what we are doing is ensuring that we have a hardware-based environment where the computation can occur that is secure and has not been tampered. This is what I mean when I want private and untampered compute. And one of our final notes on the technical understanding of this before we move into why it's becoming important. So if I want to do attestation correctly, I'm going to be able to measure that at every single point. So we want the initial measurement, we want signing and sealing, verification, and reporting of that state. So let me take you into a bit of an understanding about time and compute. I am relatively new to confidential computing. I am absolutely not new to real-time computing, and this is a really nice lens to put on understanding this. So we want to look at the idea of a secure state. A verified state really is important here, established through the attestation process. Now, I want to choose exactly what moment in time I want to be checking in on a verified state. Generally, in real-time analytics, anything with the dimension of time, you have 3 options. You can use wall time, which is the real world. You can use relative time, the point from which the execution or processes started. Or you can use monadic time, which allows you to literally consider the ticks of T to only be state changes, has nothing to do with real-world time. And that's my favorite because it's much easier to analyze. So I want to think about the monadic moment of a trusted state because I'm about to step you down and explain to you all these different data sets that are probably at risk, but I need you to understand that at any time, these would be continuously running, right? These could be being brought in through real-time inputs. So it's a list, a running array of data, but we're going to stop it and take it down to a single amount of data. Because I think it's really interesting. So let's assume that we have a fully enabled TEE and we are running data on it. The reason why you often want to be running something in confidential computing is because it has sensitive data that is potentially has civilian data on it. So whoever you are in this room, you should be able to see yourself embodied in this type of data. So I want you to step into the role of thinking about how often are you personally represented in the types of data that I'm about to explain to you. So What kind of data would you recommend for confidential compute? I'll give you some examples, and these are absolutely non-exhaustive. High-value proprietary algorithms. These are absolutely necessary for confidential computing. Corporations, startups, nonprofits, for example, are working with innovative algorithms and their unique data sets, and these are the most likely to be hacked at this moment because attacks on data execution, I think, are going to be much more likely to be aimed at the algorithms than the data sets moving forward. Personalized health data. If we're trying to develop our diagnostics for that, those absolutely must be confidentially computed because you have the ability to identify a single or a group of individuals from it. Emergency grid data management. If you work in government, you understand why already. So things that are probably worth confidential compute and things that aren't. So let's be very clear that this is not a hammer for every single piece of data. It's only for sensitive data and sensitive algorithms. PHI, financial information, personally identifiable information, corporate intellectual property, and government classified information are absolutely where we should be looking to implement this. And things that are generally publicly available information, aggregated non-personal data, promotional content, non-sensitive, public domain, are not considered something that has to be confidentially computed, but they raise the conditions by which these become more important for confidential compute. Now let me explain what that means. A couple of things that are also probably appropriate for confidential computing that I think we just haven't really considered, right? So decentralized finance, smart contracts, predictive policing algorithms, potentially. And one that I came across from just going back home was the medical data set sitting within our Indian health centers because they are shutting down entire genetics programs in tribes because they're getting breached too often, and they have not been communicated with that there is an architecture you can use to continue to make progress on your medical data while it is being continuously hacked by adversaries. So, why is it important to consider not just the sensitive data sets and the sensitive algorithms, but the total context of the way that the digital world looks right now to understand the risks that we're taking? This really comes down to unicity. So when I was working at National Institutes of Health, they were attempting to make a massive data set made of all of the publicly available data from NIH, and they were finding wild conditions of unicity all the time. So this is a very, very technical way to say that you can have conditions by which I only need a column or two from a disparate 6 or 7 data sets, and I have the ability now to re-identify an individual or a group of individuals. I have chosen very specifically this for all of you to consider reading because it is the first time that I saw the Institute of the National Institutes of Health cite Netflix as being a concern. So things that are already at high risk for unicity, and these are things that we generally consider public, but if we have data sets where we are trying to find, for example, rare diseases in a state, then the state information around this could be used to re-identify those individuals again without holding that very sensitive data set in complete closure and isolation. So, detailed census data, healthcare service usage records, tax return information, public transportation usage data, and educational records and performance data, that is becoming increasingly important because a lot of that is being run with interesting data collected with timestamps, which concerns me. So, wow, you've convinced me. Confidential computing is powerful. Why aren't we using this for everything? Now, one, there's a lot of conditions where it just does not hit the condition of both sensitive data or sensitive algorithm. But in my opinion, right now, and the reason why I joined CCC and I'm on this stage with you right now is because I as a civilian will be impacted if you do not take this seriously. And so will you. In my opinion, the biggest blocker to confidential computing right now is regulators not understanding the conditions for which confidential computing is becoming increasingly necessary. If it is both sensitive data or a sensitive algorithm, or both, please strongly consider and evaluating if you should confidentially compute. So, I want to offer 2 books to anyone who is a developer in the room. A regulator will not. Ooh, I have a copy with me too. Wait, bring it up. So the 2 books that right now are really, really inspiring me, because they always keep you. So Cyber Deception is a series of books that came out. This is the latest one from 2022. And it's basically how can you build out observability like honeypots into your systems. It's always been my favorite because it takes a machine learning approach at dealing with adversarial attacks and then putting them into a fishbowl and watching them, which is kind of fun. But in the final chapter of Cyber Deception, from this as the latest book, says that increasingly, even if you can create a fishbowl to observe, what they are now observing is that they are not, their algorithms are usually aimed at tracking human behavior, like natural human latency, those kind of signals. And now they know that most of these adversarials are machine learning agents. And now you're just having machine learning agent against machine learning agent in a fishbowl until one of them wins. And if you keep them in the fishbowl, it's very likely that the adversarial is just learning your honeypot architecture. So I gave up until I read Trust in Computer Systems. Because right now, from what I understood as the best way to protect some of these computing systems, I thought we had run out of options. I genuinely do not believe that now. I went out, read Trust in Computer Systems in the Cloud, and then got right back in touch with Mike Bursell because I understood that this was a true path forward. I strongly encourage you to read this book. So, special thanks and awareness to the Confidential Computing Consortium. If you have more questions, comments, concerns, how can we be better communicating to you as regulators and government officials about the conditions by which this is necessary and important? Because when I was at NIH, we were very aware of unicity. We were very aware of threats to our compute surfaces. And that does not seem to be holding true across government agency, and it must. Again, because unicity doesn't care about your individual data set. It cares about the aggregate that they can get from that. So Confidential Computing Consortium, you can reach out to us at confidentialcomputing.io, find all of our resources. If you want to get in touch with me personally, my name is Sal Kimmich, and you know me. I did want to give one quick shout out to the only non-security track talk I will be going to. I really, really recommend going to the talk on how memes forced me to learn minimal Linux systems from Sun Hastings. That's Godfly sponsored, meaning this is someone who is presenting a passion project that is never going to be appropriate for corporate, but it's going to teach you a lot of security skills. This teaches you how to use a minimal Linux system in order to securely rickroll someone else's computer. And it's a really good talk. So with that, I think we're good.